And a former astronaut says aliens exist. Edgar Mitchell, who was part of the Apollo 14 mission, told a radio interviewer that sources at NASA describe the extraterrestrials as, quote, little people who look strange to us. He says they supposedly have a small frame, large eyes, and large head.
I happen to be privileged enough to have be in on the fact that we have been visited on this planet. And the UFO phenomenon is real, although it's been covered up by our governments for quite a long time.
Mitchell says our technology is not nearly as sophisticated as the extraterrestrials and warned that had they been hostile, we would have been gone by now. NASA praised Mitchell as a great American, but said it doesn't track UFOs and is not involved in a cover-up about alien life. Wolf?
All right, we'll watch this story together with you. Thank you.
This former Apollo 14 astronaut, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, was on a radio show over in England, and he says that for 6 decades the government's been covering up the fact that aliens do exist. Guess who's joining us on the phone? Dr. Mitchell, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Dr. Mitchell, you've walked on the moon, you've done so much, you've had a fantastic career. How long have you known that we've had contact with aliens?
Well, the rumor, see, I grew up in Roswell, where the so-called Roswell incident took place. So the local lore I've known for 60 years. Mm-hmm. But, however, as a result of my astronaut experience, some of the old-timers, I call them the old-timers, I've never had a first-hand experience. I mean, I've never seen the UFO. But some of the old-timers of that period who were hushed up thought I would be credible, and they wanted to pass on their story before they passed on. So I was contacted, and I was told their stories many years ago.
Okay, Edgar, who are the people who told you there were aliens, and how would they know? Well,
because some of the people, I'm not going to give names, because some of the people were just locals involved in the so-called Roswell crash when that happened. And also, my folks were ranchers in that area, and we knew all the ranch people.
So people who saw something?
Beg your pardon?
People who saw something.
Some of the people who saw something and were in military or intelligence activities at that point, and were under very severe secrecy oaths at that point throughout their life.
Because, Dr. Mitchell, that was my whole point when we discussed this earlier today, was what kind of secrecy document would you have to sign if you were given this type of privileged information?
In those days, there wasn't a document.
Yeah.
They were threatened. I mean, there was real threat. You're not going to talk about this.
What, from the government threatening?
Yeah, right.
Now, let me ask you, you said that these creatures are small, with big heads and big eyes?
We don't know that. I don't know that personally. I haven't seen them.
But is that what they told you? Is that what your sources told you?
That's what the lore is. I mean, the normal...
But who told you about the lure?
Like about what, please?
Who, like, for example, when you talk to these people who wanted their stories to live on because they won't...
It was just to confirm that the Roswell incident did take place, and it wasn't... The government knew it was an alien spacecraft.
Now, it was about 10 years ago. You had a press conference where you laid all these facts bare. You talked about this in public.
I actually went to the Pentagon and was talked to intelligence officer at the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Yeah.
And he said, I don't know about this, but I'm going to find out.
All right.
And he eventually called me back and said, you're right, but he couldn't get in and get access to it.
What's that guy's name?
No, I'm not going to tell you that.
Well, I mean, because look, Edgar, a lot of people are listening to this and they're thinking, well,
I don't care what they think. You want my story? I'm telling you.
No, we understand, but some people think that it's
so let me ask you this, Dr. Mitchell. Do you think that other people now will come to the forefront since this is being discussed again, since you're bringing this?
I think it's about to, because there's been a lot of very serious and good investigators working this problem for 50 years or more.
I mean, you realize this is the story of the century, if it's true.
Well, the fact that we have not alone in the universe, that's a very important story.
I mean, that's better than a little bit of water on Mars.
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me tell you, it beats water on Mars, and the fact that these little creatures are nice and smarter than us is it bigger news.
Dr. Edgar Mitchell, we thank you very much for joining us on the phone to try to straighten things out, and we thank you for getting up early this morning down there in Florida.
One more thing. It got mixed up that this had to do with NASA. It doesn't have anything to do with NASA.
Okay, just
thanks
other
for the
sources.
Clarification.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, straight ahead, Kinky
In one
Freedom.
of the most extraordinary interviews of our time, former astronaut Gordon Cooper breaks his silence.
There were a number of extraterrestrial vehicles out there cruising around.
You'll be astonished as this real-life American hero discusses his close encounters with alien craft.
Small saucer flew overhead and put down some landing gear and landed out on the dry lake bed, only about 50 yards out.
And we'll analyze startling new UFO footage.
These craft, because of the bright light emitting off them, including the color coming off the bottom, are often referred to as motherships.
And is there a government cover-up? NASA has already officially admitted life on other planets exists.
The simplest explanation to us is that they are the remains of Martian life.
But if an extraterrestrial intelligence is already visiting Earth, how long have they been here? What does the military really know about aliens?
There's just no question but that information on this topic has been kept from the public.
This shot was taken in London, outside of London, in '95, near a freeway bridge. You can see the craft very clearly hovering alongside the bridge as it approaches an open parking lot. You see the lights of the parking lot. In this next sequence, you see the craft come to a landing in the parking lot. You can see the two lights of the parking lot. There's the craft. Now, what's very striking is after this craft lands, you can see it coming down here, and it has released a probe that seems to be making its way toward the road. You can see the cars moving in the distance. You can see a very slow movement. Now you can see the original craft that came into the picture is now rising above the road and seems to be leaving the scene, leaving the probe behind.
As the probe slowly moved away, it passed over the freeway below. This dramatic footage has become known as the London Landing. Never before in history has a probe been caught on tape being released from a flying saucer. This is truly an extraordinary sighting. In Henderson, Nevada, we see another probe-shaped UFO that was videotaped at dusk. In 1990, we see yet another probe that was videotaped in Las Vegas just after dark. This probe hovered in a residential district for nearly an hour as the cameraman captured this dramatic footage. In what may be one of the lengthiest close encounters ever recorded, a probe hovered over a neighborhood for 3 consecutive days. The local residents described this probe as completely silent, not making a sound as it hovered in the sky. Eyewitness accounts described the probe as having a searchlight that would turn on and off throughout the 3-day sighting. It took 2 days of repeated calls from the local residents to the sheriff's office before a deputy was sent to investigate.
That appears as a light in the sky. This is very common, actually. But this particular craft, you can actually see the color discharge on the bottom, which is very unusual. You can see the craft approaching this hill, and it passes behind the hill and then rises again a few moments later behind some trees in the distance. It's also very striking to see the craft moving in and out of the tree line. I would say that this footage here is quite rare due to the fact that it's so clear. Again, you can see a lot of detail on the top of the craft, some sort of dome on the top, and again, the bright illumination is unmistakable.
However, you need to understand that the technologies that we have, and we were discussing, are not theoretical. We have actionable intelligence that any committee in Congress or executive action can find regarding current operations. And I just want to go through a list of them very quickly of these facilities and corporations for which we have witnesses who can be subpoenaed by the committees of the Congress. This was developed at the request of Congressman Christopher Cox of Orange County, with whom I met, and was later further developed for the briefing that we put together for President Obama. These facilities are the Edwards Air Force Base and subsections where at the dry lake bed where the Lockheed Skunk Works operations, Haystack Butte, China Lakes, George Air Force Base, and the closed Norton Air Force Base where an anti-gravity device, so-called alien reproduction vehicle, for which we have the schematics, was seen by Frank Carlucci and others on our witness team. Tabletop Mountain and Blackjack Control. The aerospace facilities there are the Northrop Anthill Facility, Tejon Ranch, the McDonnell Douglas Llano Plant, Lockheed Martin Hellendale Plant, and the Phillips Lab. At the Nellis Air Force Facility, so-called Area 51, no one calls it that. There's S4 and S12, Pahut Mesa, Groom Lake, and a number of sub-facilities. The most important facility is in Utah, near Provo, the Dugway Proving Grounds, all of which is underground, and the airspace above it is classified. There are no roads into this facility. The New Mexico facilities include Los Alamos National Labs with underground connectors to the so-called Dulce area where the biological work is being done, and Kirtland Air Force Base. And the complex there includes Sandia National Laboratories, Phillips Labs, Manzano Mountain Weapons Storage Facility, Coyote Canyon, and the White Sands Complex. In Arizona, near Fort Huachuca, which is Army Intelligence Headquarters, there is a UGB underground base where one of our witnesses, who will testify, worked on 9 separate extraterrestrial vehicles that had been down through advanced electromagnetic pulse weapons, and there are several different species of extraterrestrial biologicals stored at that facility. The other facilities, and this goes on, include a special compartmented area of Cheyenne Mountain, where we have witnesses in our team who can be subpoenaed, where we have tracked extraterrestrial vehicles in our solar system that were measuring 26 miles in diameter. There are also facilities in Australia, a key one being Pine Gap, the so-called Alice Springs facility, which is mostly a U.S. Air Force facility, even though it is in Australia. I recently talked to the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia about this. Also, the Redstone Arsenal and the Marshall Space Flight Center. We have a scientist at the Redstone Arsenal who works under contract for IT&T who have developed these transdimensional systems. He was under contract with my project to bring these energy devices out, and he was then threatened by a former CIA director and what I call the goon squad that went down there 3 years ago in March. This is just part of the information we have, and this information is on the flash drive given to Stephen Bassett's staff, then that you're all welcome to review. Thank you.
Thank you. Well,
although as Minister of National Defense, I had sighting reports of UFOs. I was too busy to be concerned about them at the time because I was trying to unify the Army, Navy, and Air Force into a single Canadian Defence Force. And that itself was a kind of battle to the finish. So this was not high on my agenda. But about 10 years ago, I started getting interested due to a young man from Ottawa sending me material on the subject. I told him I was too busy to read it, but he had confidence that someday I would. It took me a while to get around to reading it, but I took it for my summer reading in 2005 and was really impressed with what was contained in it. And what I thought to myself is there are huge issues here, huge issues. And the American people and the people of the world have a right to know what's going on because they're part of it. It's not just an isolated thing. I accept the invitation of Victor Vigiani, who's over here somewhere, and his cohort, Mike Bird, to speak to a symposium at the University of Toronto. And I said, UFOs are as real as the airplanes flying overhead. That gave me the dubious distinction of being the first person of cabinet rank in the G8 group of countries to say so unequivocally. the 1960s sometime, it was a flotilla of UFOs headed south that crossed into NATO territory in Europe. And the Commander-in-Chief of the Supreme Allied Headquarters in Europe was naturally very shaken. Fortunately, or maybe divine providence, before the panic button was pushed, the flotilla turned around and headed back north. Obviously, they had thought maybe they were Russian, and they were very concerned about it. Anyway, an investigation was launched into this whole subject, and a document was prepared which concluded that at least 4 species had been visiting Earth for thousands of years. And this is my own view at this stage as well. So, except for that, there are just a couple of things that we've talked about that I'd like to refer to. And one was that we were referring to them as they until this morning when Linda Moulton Howe, I think she was the first one, actually named 3 different species. I don't think we can any more refer to them as they, because they're not an amorphous mass. They are different species and consequently may have different agendas. I don't think we can say that they all have the same agenda any more than we could say that the United States, China, and Russia had the same agenda. Our real interests may be very similar, but as of now, our perceived interests are still quite far apart. One more observation before I begin what I want to say, and that is that we spent quite a bit of time talking about the 66-year-old cadavers, and I was glad to have Linda this morning finally say that there are live ETs on Earth at this present time, and at least 2 of them probably working with the United States government. The other species that I learned about not too long ago was called the tall whites. And this is when Paula Harris broke the story just a few years ago. And through her good offices, I had the chance to talk for about 3 hours with former Airman Charles Hall and listen to this absolutely fascinating story of how he was working with, first of all, he was scared out of his skin, but after that, when he got to know them, how he was working with, and finally they became to trust each other and have a good working relationship with the tall whites at the gunnery range at Indian Springs in Nevada. And these tall whites were living on United States Air Force property and working in cooperation with the United States Air Force and sharing technology with them. He wrote a book, incidentally, called Millennial Hospitality. There are 4 different versions, but Paula says that Millennial Hospitality number 2 is the best. I think that's the one I read, and it's a very interesting read if you want to sort of get inside the problem of what it's like to bump into these people floating across the terrain in the desert. Well, enough on that for now. My interest is in full disclosure. And my only caveat is I think probably I would say 95 to 98% full disclosure. I know of 1 or 2 things that I'm not sure should be in the public domain, at least yet. They will be someday, I'm sure, but not maybe immediately. But just as children survive the idea of the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus when they become adult, I think that tax-paying citizens are quite capable of accepting the new and broader reality that we live in a cosmos teeming with life of various sorts. The fact that some other civilizations are more advanced than we are may be humbling. It exists, and it's being kept secret by the same vested interests who control our destiny. Who are these vested interests, and what are they up to? Well, Senator, you were talking about a military junta. In my opinion, that is true, but I have broadened and deepened the definition to cabal, and the cabal comprises members of the Three Sisters: the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderbergers, and the Trilateral Commission, the International Banking Cartel, the Oil Cartel, members of various intelligence organizations, and select members of the military junta, who together have become a shadow government of not only the United States, but of much of the Western world. The aim of the game is a world government comprising members of the cabal who are elected by no one and accountable to no one. And according to Mr. Rockefeller, the plan is well advanced. Does this help you to understand why our civil rights are being taken away from us? I say us, because Canada too is included in the grand plan. So here we are more than a decade later fighting another war that can't be won. There is no country on earth powerful enough to protect its citizens against fanatical hate, as we learned from the Boston Marathon. And the mere attempt to pursue the impossible pits neighbor against neighbor and the state power structure against everyone. All of the freedoms won by the millions of men and women who fought and died in World War II are being flushed unceremoniously down the drain. The only hope of peace is a negotiated settlement. This will require a paradigm shift in American attitudes. It involves a de facto renunciation of the plan for a new American energy and the adoption of a pledge of cooperation with all humankind to build the kind of world which we are collectively capable of. Young people everywhere need to be challenged by a noble cause. They need to be involved in arresting global warming, creating a banking system that is just and sustainable, and lead the way in the transformation to the new reality that we have to live in harmony with our celestial neighbors, as well as seeking peace on earth. In a word, we have to become spiritual beings and practice the one tenet that the world's major religions have in common, and that is the Golden Rule.